Hello, everybody. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome to March. We're so excited to be here. This is, oh my gosh, what a crazy year it's been. But we've been full of virtual events here at Tattered Cover Bookstore in Denver, Colorado. My name is McKaylee. I work for Tattered Cover, and I really want to say thank you. This is the first and foremost thing that we say at our virtual events because we really mean it. We would not be here without your support. Tattered Cover is 50 years old this year. In 2021, we turned 55. That's bananas for a bookstore. And it's because of you, the community, that's been supporting us for all that time and continuing to support us through the pandemic, this health crisis. And I know that Tattered Cover, among other independent bookstores and other small businesses, we're so grateful, and we would not be here without you. So thank you for taking the time tonight. For those of you who may not know, Tattered Cover is a local independent bookstore in Denver, Colorado. We have 4 locations in the Denver metro area. And we, like I said, have been open since 1971. And we are open right now to the public too. So if you are in the Denver metro area, you can come and join us wearing your mask over your mouth and your nose. And you can come shop with us for about 90 minutes or so. Come grab a cup of coffee at one of our cafes, browse the books, take in the smells. But if you're like me and you want to shop in your pajamas, or you're not quite ready to go out, or if you don't live in this area of Denver, Colorado, then you can always shop online at tatteredcover.com. That's also where you can check out all of our virtual events that we have coming up. We know that you could be anywhere. There's so many things out there going on right now, and we're just so grateful that you're here with us. And we've got plenty of more events coming up. For instance, we have David Roberts and Ed Douglas, who are talking about their books, The Bear's Ears by David Roberts, and Ed Douglas's Himalaya, A Human Story. And that is Wednesday, March 3rd. And then we have CJ Box, who's a well-known Western fiction mystery writer, who's a town favorite here, Tattered Cover favorite. And he's going to be on Thursday, March 4th. So you guys can check that out again at tatteredcover.com/events. Also, closed captioning is enabled for those who might need it. There's a black bar at the bottom of the screen you're watching me on right now. There's a button labeled CC on it. If you click that button, closed captioning is enabled if you want it or need it. And now I want to talk about our authors of the hour. I'm very excited for this event. I feel like this is a hidden gem of a book that I just want to uncover and everybody to get a chance to read. And we have quite a very fascinating conversation for you, literally all across the continent. We've got Canada, California, and we've got an event in Denver. So it's quite interesting. We have Forrest Gander and Gil Adamson. Forrest Gander was born in the Mojave Desert. He lives in California, a translator and multi-genre writer with degrees in geology and literature. He's the recipient of numerous awards, among the Pulitzer Prize, the Best Translated Book Award, and fellowships of the Library of Congress, the Guggenheim, and the United States Artists Foundation. His most recent title is Twice Alive. And then our author of the hour, Gil Adamson, is the critically acclaimed author of Ridgerunner, which won the Writers' Trust Fiction Prize, was a finalist for the Scotiabank Giller Prize, and was named Best Book of the Year by Globe and Mail and the CBC. Her first novel, The Outlander, won the Dashiell Hammett Prize for Literary Excellence in Crime Writing, the Amazon.ca First Novel Award, the Relit Award, and the Drummers Generals Award. It was the finalist for the Commonwealth Writers' Prize, CBC Canada Reads, and the Prix Féminin in France. Longlisted for the International IMPAC Dublin Literary Award, chosen as a Globe and Mail and Washington Post Top 100 book. She's also the author of a collection of linked stories, Help Me, Jacques Cousteau, and 2 poetry collections, Primitive and Ashland. She currently lives in Toronto, and we are talking about that acclaimed book, Ridgerunner. It is my honor to welcome both Gil and Forrest, and we're going to have them turn on their videos here. There we are. Hi, Forrest. Hello. And there she is. Hello, Gil.
McKaylee, hi. Gil, hi.
Am I unmuted?
Yes, you're good. Thank you so much for joining us, both of you.
Well, thanks for having me. Thanks for having us.
Absolutely. Gil, I'd love it if you could start off with what is Ridgerunner about, and then I would love it to back off and let the two of you take this show on the road.
That sounds great. Whenever I'm asked this, I always say absolutely the best way for me to introduce my book is to read the jacket copy, because smarter people than me have written it. And it is also the way you would encounter the book at a bookstore. So if you can, forgive me reading some superlatives, it also gives you, information on what the book is like.
Please do.
I'll give you the cover. Ridgerunner. Spooky, beautiful cover. November 1917, William Morland is in mid-flight. After nearly 20 years, the notorious thief known as the Ridgerunner has returned. Moving through the Rocky Mountains and across the border to Montana, the solitary drifter, impoverished in means and aged beyond his years, is also a widower and a father. He is determined to steal enough money to secure his son's future. 12-year-old Jack Bolton has been left in the care of Sister Beatrice, a formidable nun who keeps him in cloistered seclusion in her grand old house. Though he knows his father is coming for him, the boy longs to return to the family's cabin deep in the woods. When Jack finally breaks free, he takes with him something the nun is determined to get back at any cost. Set against the backdrop of a distant war raging in Europe and a rapidly changing landscape in the West, Gil Adamson's follow-up to her award-winning debut, The Outlander, is a vivid historical novel that draws from the epic tradition and a literary Western brimming with a cast of unforgettable characters. And that's it.
Well, that's wonderful. And once again, I look forward to listening to the pair of you. Just to let you viewers know, there will be a Q&A session. Some of you have already been active in the chat on the screen you're watching us on YouTube. So that's where you'll ask your questions. Take it away, you two.
All right.
Thanks, McKaylee.
Thanks, McKaylee.
Hello.
Hey, Gil. Yeah. So it's funny hearing that you read that description of the novel, because if someone asked me what the novel was about, the very first thing I would say is it's about language. That as soon as you're just a few pages in it, you know that you're reading someone who can really write. That the language is so beautiful.
Oh, thank you. That means a lot coming from you, and especially coming from a poet, because, I started off as a poet too, and I think perhaps that urge, that you learn early on as a baby poet to pay attention to absolutely everything, every word that, goes down on the page, has helped me. It's also made sure that I'm a slightly slow writer, because I do put all that pressure on every single line. So I'm glad to know that it came across positively with someone who knows what they're talking about.
Yeah, the combination of the plot, the tension, the energy that runs all the way through the novel, that sort of is this adrenal lift. And then the specificity, the particularity, obviously lots of historical research too, about horses and about.
I had to go to town on the whole question of horses. I actually have a few show and tell items here if we get to it. Some of the crazy books that, you run across if you're a Western writer, which I guess I am. And your eyes are open to these kinds of things, that absolute hoot, some of them, and I think I'm glad to hear you use the word adrenal, because, one of the worries, I think, when you are a style first writer is that, it's all going to be style, and you have a terror of boring the reader. So, for me, it was important that I kept, focusing on the story as much as I'm capable, and making, in Westerns, it's pretty clear that the stakes are very high. I keep saying this in Westerns, the stakes are high, and that makes you care about the outcome. So as a writer, I had to, pay attention to that as well. So yeah, research was absolutely hellish at the beginning, because it's set in the First World War, and there's a little bit about internment camps in it. I have these characters who live out in the woods, and they live in this very wilderness area between the town of Banff, Alberta, and Lake Louise. And anybody who's ever traveled to Banff will be able to picture it as this, spectacularly beautiful place, but it's also quite remote, and it gets very, very cold. And they put internment camps all over Canada in the First World War. And so I needed to do a lot of research, and I needed to understand kind of what was going on in that particular area at that particular time. And so that meant I had to go to, government archives and, immerse myself in military diaries of, each day. They would say how many people had escaped and how many had been brought back, and, who was sick and what the weather was like and all that military stuff. So there was that. And I also had to do research on guns, and I know nothing about guns, and I had to do research on horses. And so, at a certain point I realized, Jill, it's a rabbit hole. You're going to have to just sit down and forge ahead.
The internment camps that you mentioned, and they seemed particularly relevant once again today in sort of Trump's America, certainly down here, and the reason that people were interned. And I found that a moving sort of small piece, parenthetical piece of the novel, emotionally. Just one last question about the language. I'm just curious.
Yeah.
The process of revision. Do you write really slowly, or and then it's kind of finished, or do you go back and did you revise a lot of drafts of this?
Well, it was very similar to my first novel, which is, I keep saying Ridgerunner is part Western, it's part child's adventure. And it stands alone on its own, but there is a previous story. And if you like this book, maybe you'll read the previous story, because they can be read. They stand alone from each other. But I wrote this book the same way, which is I basically wrote it sequentially, which means I started from a first image and a first scene, and then marched slowly through it. And that I don't work with an outline. I often get to a point where I'm not quite sure what's going to happen next, and I have to kind of withdraw and think about it for a while. And I'm lucky because it's always kind of eventually come to me what definitely has to happen next. And often, again, I'll come across a book in my reading or something like that just sparks it, and often it might not be a book. It might be a poem or lyrics or a movie, and it'll just spark something, and I'll go, I can use that. So I write. I don't know that I recommend it as a way to write, for the reason that it is quite slow, and you can paint yourself into a corner. But the way I wanted to write these books was very language based, and so that was the only way I could do it, was to discover the book through my language and through my writing as it happened. And hopefully what that does is that when the reader is reading it, they are experiencing something that unfolded organically and feels a bit more organic, rather than something that is sort of metronomic and has beats, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was really surprised when I went to visit William Faulkner's house, because his work seems to be so stream of consciousness and written like all through the night. But he actually storyboarded a lot of his novels on chalkboards around the room.
That is amazing. Now, I can tell you that I have done that. When I got the whole thing done, I don't know how many other people feel this way. It may also be the case with books of poetry and nonfiction books. It seems sort of too big for you to hold in your head at once. And I have actually, put scenes out on index cards and laid them out on a very, very long table, and just stood there kind of staring at them and figuring out that everything is where it's supposed to be, and that there aren't too many scenes with this character all bunching up. So yeah, once you get to that stage, then it does become there's a little more, what's the word? Organizing. And then of course you get an editor, and then you hit a wall there with somebody saying, this is what we need to do. And I love that process. I love that stage of the whole, publishing thing.
Some of the excitement and the way that you talked about maybe writing yourself into places where you didn't know how to get out of. But actually, it seems like there's this punctuated rhythm to that reminded me of the energy. And I don't know if you're a Akira Kurosawa fan.
Yes.
But in his movie Hidden Fortress, he has the people around him writing every day, writing the characters into an impossible scenario. And then he has to figure out by the time they film the next day, how they get out of it.
I didn't know that. That's fascinating because his movies feel completely different from anything else. And they're obsessively, you completely focused on what's happening in these films. I love him.
Yeah, me too.
He's very inspirational.
One of the things, God, I've got so many questions to ask you now. I'm getting too excited. Well, so I was going to ask you, well, I mentioned Faulkner and how his novels share characters.
Yeah.
A lot of his novels share characters living in that fictional Yognapatalpa County.
Yeah.
And considering the connectedness of the characters and place in the two novels you've written so far, I'm wondering if you're thinking of a third novel that is connected to this landscape and characters.
I feel so foolish. Like, I feel foolish to have written what amounts to a sequel. I don't know why I feel foolish, because why not?
Yeah.
I'm allowed to do anything I want. But yes, I found myself writing the final chapter, which is an epilogue, and it's set in Texas, a place in Texas that I think both you and I have been.
Yeah.
Terlingua, Texas. And yeah, for some reason I wrote the end of the book as something that's naturally set to sort of open up into something else again. So yes, the short answer is yes. And I have ideas, but like I say, I'm the kind of person who has to wait for ideas to percolate. I am percolating on something right now.
Well, I think that's exciting. I think to bring all those readers that have read the other ones, into the next ones.
And hopefully faster than the last two books, because there's about a decade between the first novel and the second one. So I have to get the lead out. Let's face it.
So I thought it was interesting that your one of the main characters, William Morland, loses his name first to his activity. He becomes known as the Ridgerunner.
Good
and
point.
Later he loses his name again on purpose as a disguise when they move to Terlingua, as you were saying. And meanwhile, his son, Jack, also loses his name, at least temporarily, when the nun who hopes to be his mother adopts and renames him.
Yes.
And then Sister Beatrice, that nun, is really ironically named, since she's definitely not leading anyone anywhere like paradise. So tell me how you were thinking about names and identity in the book.
It's such a great question, and it's something that I had such a great time with in the book. So many people, Samson as well. That's not Samson Beaver, right. Isn't his name. No. He adopts the name of a man that he admires and has spent some of his life wanting to get out of his own history and his own self. I find naming fascinating because by and large, we don't name ourselves, someone else does. And so few of us change that. Jack's mother's name is Mary Bolton, and he has taken his mother's surname instead of his father's. So, it's a funny thing to say William Morland and his son, Jack Bolton. But that's entirely possible. And, Jack, being a kind of a patient kid, looks at this situation where he's being renamed and doesn't really see it as the aggression that it actually is. She's trying to erase his past. She hopes to erase his past because she feels that his past is dirty and unfortunate and living in the woods and all these sort of uncivilized things. And he knows from his own experience of growing up where he did with the two hermits that were his parents, and suddenly being thrown into town, that there's an element of society, of civilization being a little uncivilized in its own way. So the sort of weirdness of suddenly having a different name, that you haven't chosen. I just thought there was an awful lot of meat on that. And I also, my grandfather never called anyone by his or her actual name. That, all of his children had nicknames. His wife had a nickname. If you moved in next door to him, he would just start calling you something else.
What did he call you, Joe?
It was weird. It was funny actually. So yeah, I've turned it into something a bit more serious with my book. But yeah, I'm glad you noticed that, because I had quite a bit of that was enjoyable for me.
So aside from the nun, who is kind of stripped, this is a kind of two-pronged question. Then the nun, Sister Beatrice, who's pretty much stripped of her sensuality as a woman. And there are very few developed women characters in this book. Of course, your first one focused on the mother, on Mary. But in both books, there are actually really very few characters. And I wondered if that had to do with your gifts as a poet. Sort of the art of condensation steers you away from a really large cast of characters.
I hope so. And I hope that as well. I mean, I almost felt like, The Outlander has one main character, Mary Bolton, and the camera is very hard, tightly focused on her and her mental state. And while I was writing this one, I became aware that there were really a lot of guys in it. And, I had to proceed rather carefully because I'm not a guy and I never was, a young boy. So, and I'm writing from the point of view of men, and I get into their brains and I get into the mind of a young boy. And so, I did find myself doing that kind of weird research where I was asking my male friends how much they remembered from when they were young. And I really didn't come up with, men didn't really have much to say about it. I was surprised because, as I may have told you, if you ask a woman what life was like at 12, 13, she'll have a lot to say. So yeah, you're right that there aren't very many characters in either book, but in Ridgerunner, I almost felt like I had too many. So maybe you're right that it is the poet's urge to keep things as you say, as condensed and crystalline as possible.
Yeah.
But also this is only my second novel, and I really didn't want to juggle too many things. And that I think it also helps when you're reading books, as long as the characters are attractive enough that you will stay with them. They're not repellent in any way. It's great to be able to focus on them in some kind of, for them not to be part of a crowd.
No, your focus is intense and their development is intense. You really feel them. And for someone who hasn't, didn't grow up as a guy, I was really delighted to read this scene description of a man peeing, because I'm surprised so many men write novels. Cormac McCarthy, things happen in outhouses, but guys don't ever describe peeing, which they do all the time. And
it's something that I notice. I've almost deliberately put those sort of quotidian body things in my books, because let's face it, we all need to pee once in a while, and no one ever talks about it, and it's just part of life. Let's talk. I think that was Samson who goes away and pees and turns his back on Jack because he's had it with him.
There's a poet who's dead now who I really loved, C.K. Williams, American poet.
Yeah.
Has a poem about loneliness. in which he describes a woman who's writing letters to her dead dog. It's a real killer.
Oh
But
my
your image of that former nun giving a hot bath to her runaway son's clothes in lieu of a bath to the boy is one of the most devastatingly awful and despairing images I've ever read. Do you remember that image coming to you?
Yes, I did. And, the nun, just without any kind of spoilers, the nun is a very complex person, and she's a very intense person. She's smart. If she'd been a man, she probably would have been a doctor. And she has some, kinks in her personality, but she truly, truly loves Jack and truly is devastated by him leaving her. And he's just a young kid. He just decided, I've had enough of this. I'm going home. And he knows that she'll argue with him, so he leaves in the middle of the night. And it's just an awful, awful thing for her. And it just, he left behind his clothes, and they would smell like him. And we love the way our loved ones smell. And I'm glad it had that effect on you, because it made me very sad to write, I have a cat that's menacing me. I'm going to give her a push.
So in Ridgerunner, you describe Jack's mother as a paranoid, secretive, and deeply damaged character. And Jack's father is AWOL throughout most of the book. He has no idea how to be a father.
Yeah.
Therefore, in the tradition of critics who read biography into fiction, I guess we can assume that you had a miserable childhood with highly dysfunctional parents.
Well, I did, and I'm about to talk to you about it for a full 20 minutes. You're gonna want to jump off a bridge, but no, actually, I mean, I have to say, I think if you read The Outlander, you'll see where Mary comes from, and that, in fact, as strange as it sounds, by the time she's in this book and sort of appearing as his mother, she's much more grounded and calm than she used to be. And in fact, having had a child has not fixed her in any way, but certainly widened her to the world. She's not so focused on her own survival anymore. She's focused on his, and unfortunately, she's dead for the whole novel. But I think she appears in kind of almost not in ghostly form, but she does appear in memory and in various other ways in the book. So she's always kind of there with the kid. But how do two very strange people who are hermits, who neither of them really has ever been parented, what do they do when they have to be parents? And they've muddled through. They found a way to muddle through. And even though they live in the woods, they found a way to teach their kid things that the kid is going to need to be able to function as well as they, and they both function very well off the grid, as we say now. And so what do they need to teach him? And what skills is he going to need? And there's a scene where Jack is looking at a map that his father has inscribed on the wall of the cabin. And every time his father goes out on walkabout, he goes exploring, and he goes to find out, what's beyond the margins of the map. And when he comes home, he inscribes more. And so it's this big sort of amorphous blob with the cabin at the center of the map, and over the child's life, the map has grown and grown, and his father has figured out ways to conflate distances and to make it clear using codes, kind of how far it is from here to here. Is it 2 days with a little up arrow, meaning 2 days of a gradual uphill? Is it 3 hours straight down? So he has tried his best to educate. And he also, because he's, a prodigious thief, he just goes into town and steals books, textbooks and novels and things that, they can use for the kid. And so there is a kind of a little tiny library in the cabin. And, the child when he's living with the nun, there is a full-blown English style library, much like the one behind you, with any number of books in it, and he's not allowed to go into it. And he does anyway, of course, but so he does understand the value of an enormous library, and he loves all the books in it. So they're an odd set of parents, but hopefully the kid is happy.
Yeah. You mentioned Mary being a kind of ghost presence for a while, and
Yeah.
I was interested. Really, her backstory doesn't come up until we're about 40% of the way through the novel, and that really interested me because usually backstories, especially towards central characters, come much quicker. But what you do is you springboard the energy, the movement of the novel so quickly. We're running the ridges full speed, and then when enough of that trajectory has been covered, then you go back and fill in a little bit. And I thought that was really smart.
Oh, thank you. Well, that was another thing I had to be very careful about, because I don't know about you, but I really don't like reading exposition from a previous book or having the feeling that I'm missing something, that that I don't know this person's backstory. I also gave myself the freedom to do that because really, Jack he's a kid, and he is sort of the center of the book. It depends on your perspective. And he knows nothing about their background, and is uninterested, as most young children are, about how his parents got together or what their lives were like before. He may have asked a few questions, but, generally speaking, he certainly doesn't know the crazy backstory for his mother. And that's by design. His parents didn't tell him, and he just, he's too young really to ask the question. So I sort of felt like I could get away with it that way, because I was dealing with a kid at that particular age, which is sort of a ferocious time for any child. And then I could talk about, things that the kid doesn't know through William Morland, as he, thinks about what he's lost.
So maybe one more quick question, and then we'll open up for questions from the audience. I was going to just note for the audience that despite that you write literary thrillers, that you studied philosophy, and that there seem to be a number of notable philosopher poets in Canada. I think of Jen Zwicky and Karen Hula come to mind. And I wondered if it was an easy, natural switch for you from philosophy to literature, and if you think of the two as related.
That is an absolutely beautiful question, and I think you're right too. I live with a poet. Kevin Connolly is my husband, and he, he's an award-winning poet, and so I write poetry too. But I am surrounded by a very wide variety of different styles of and different schools of poetry, and poets who have branched out into other forms and things like that. So going back to me being in university, I was able to just take it was called an arts BA, and you could take any courses you wanted. And the courses that I took, really, I didn't study literature very much. I took courses on short story and on the American novel and various things like that, but on sci-fi. But the two sort of large areas of study were anthropology, so undergraduate anthropology, and philosophy. I found certain philosophers absolutely impossible. I couldn't get my head around some of the things they were, even their basic tenets, and others made perfect sense to me. My father at one point said, it's weird what you're studying, because anthropology is all answers and philosophy is all questions. And so I wonder if there isn't some kind of, balancing act that's happening there. And also, anthropology is all about people. At its root, it's the study of us. And so is philosophy. It's the study of us and
So is literature.
how we perceive the world. And anthropology is also a sort of a more, anthropology has all kinds of really undergraduate anthropology, and some of the monographs that you would have studied have got a lot of warts. But they are fascinating because they are a study of how this group sees the world and how different it is from ours, when in fact it's really not different at all. It's just expressed differently, or it is massively different. And the anthropologist is trying their best to explain it in a way that is completely off. So it was fascinating. It was like a great thing to study in university, both of them.
Prepared you to be a writer.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah, for sure.
I'm not going to lie, my little philosophy minor heart was very happy with that conversation. My English major philosophy minor heart over here was like, yes, what a great question for us. That was amazing.
It is a great question. Yeah.
Brilliant. I really feel like I could just keep listening to the pair of you, but I know that there are people watching that are itching to ask their own questions. And Boris, please feel free to jump in as well, as a poet and a writer in your own right, especially questions about process or craft or anything like that. But Gil, the first one is, what makes this time period so fascinating for you?
It's the time period and it's the setting, because this is Banff, Alberta has been attracting rich tourists for 200 years, and it's been attracting photographers and artists and explorers and mountaineers and all this stuff. And 1917, the war was just horrific at that point. And Canada was fully involved, and the United States had yet to get into it at the particular setting of my book. And there were, neutral countries all over the world who were continuing to send tourists to Banff. And so it was a strangely multicultural place, considering how few young men there were wandering around. And even though it was at such a far remove from the war, the devastation had come right across to us, right across the West. The entire country was suffering as a result. And again, getting back to the internment camp, the first time I ever went to, I used to live there, but one of the first times I ever sort of went back to Banff and was driving along Highway 1A, anybody from the area will know this. You go past a little, it was just a little sort of trailhead, and it went up to what was the remains of the internment camp. And as you're driving past this and looking around, it's the middle of nowhere. The idea that, internees were there. And that was the point of it. If anybody tried to escape, where would they go? Right? So that there's an unbelievable amount of import to it. It's visual, and it's upsetting, and it's fascinating. And the time frame was important in so many different ways. And I needed the kid to be 12. And, I had a prequel. So, I was sort of fiddling with the little dates. Yeah. So
I think that's an excellent answer. And it leads into actually a really nice other question here of, would love for the both of you to talk a little bit about the influence of West Texas on your respective Westerns. Why is that part of the country so fertile for the imagination, just on the topic of setting?
Forrest?
Well, it's a border. It's borderland. It was Mexico, and was forcibly taken away from the Mexicans, but has been a highly trafficked area, both human and animal traffic across that area for a long time. So languages mix, and an incredible variety of fauna and flora, birds mix there. And then because it's such a big area and rugged, there can be a lot of isolation, and the people that want to not be around other human beings tend to gravitate towards places like that.
Yeah, you're right. And for a Canadian to go down there, me and my husband used to just drive down there. It took us 3 days, just as fast as we could to get there, because it's just so beautiful. And if you like walking, it's a great place to walk. But it was a shock for us to see, between Canada and the United States, it's called the longest undefended border in the world. And it is. It's not imaginary, but it is also kind of imaginary. And you get down into certain areas of Texas, Terlingua, and there's Texas, there's the Rio Grande, and there's Mexico. And you could, if you had a good arm, you could throw a baseball into Mexico. And there's nothing. I mean, I guess, now there's sort of bits and pieces of a wall. But it was shocking to me that we could just, get in a canoe and go across and we did go across to Mexico. And so for me as a Canadian, it seemed like almost the same thing. You just are going across this easily crossed border into a completely different culture. So, and then, as Forrest says, Forrest, you're a geologist. You have a degree in geology as well, because that would be a fascinating area to study with. I think they've got the cryptobiotic crust there, the things you're not supposed to walk on that are alive, and look like lichen almost. I mean, speaking as a person who's come from the north, to get down there into the desert and sort of look at what looks like the moon or something, like nothing's alive here, and you stand still for 3 seconds, and it's just insane how alive everything is. The first time we came in, the bluebells or the blue, it's a particular kind of bluebonnet or something.
I think bluebells. Yeah.
Bluebells, and it was perfume was in my hair, and it was like all through the car, and it just smelled gorgeous, and we were like, what must it be like to live here? And this happens every year. It's just amazing. So anyway.
That's incredible. I've never ventured down that far south, and I think that would be amazing. That sounds, it's not romantic in a way, but it has its own certain kind of beauty to it. So thank you both for sharing that and capturing it in your writing as well. So this is a little bit of a character shift question, but I think it also, both of you can answer this. So one of our viewers says, I was furious at the nun, but I also felt deep pity for her. How do you feel about Sister Beatrice? Forrest, I'd love to get your response first.
Well, I tended to feel sorry for her at first. I had empathy for her. She's smart. She's really alone. She's not like the other people that live in her town. She knows a lot about medicinal plants, but the more deadly that interest turns out to be, the less sympathy you feel for her. Exactly. But that loneliness and that wanting human contact, that complicates our relationship with her.
Gil, you earlier called her complicated. Was that your intention, to sort of divide your reader in that way with this character?
I had to make a decision when to talk honestly about her and say, okay, this is where we are with this character. And I seriously thought about putting it right up front. And that you would sort of go, what, earlier. But that would have made it a completely different book, and it would have made Jack's story less, it would have made it different. And I had to decide, is this a book in which I front load the tension, or do I give the reader a surprise? And I prefer a surprise. I really do like feeling tense, though, but just in terms of that character, I created her. I have enormous sympathy for the nun, and I feel so awful for her. I know what it feels like to be abandoned and to be unable to handle it. And, I just felt bad for her because she's never really been able to live right up to her. She's never been cared for. no one's ever really loved her, and no one really does love her. And so I feel terrible about that. But she has this one kink in her personality that just ruins it, makes her quite frightening. So anyway, I've probably spoiled it at this point, but
Okay.
I feel like you have to have deep sympathy for all your characters, and I think hopefully even when they are villains, and I don't know, you can decide yourself whether the nun is a villain. I sort of don't think she is, but you almost have to put to create sympathy in the reader, so that they feel this sort of uncomfortable association or understanding with them, or they feel they feel conflicted when they realize that they felt empathy. I think otherwise it's just a monster. You're just creating a monster. The monster you have to feel something for all the characters, and perhaps especially the negative ones, the problematic ones.
I personally think that that's a mark of a true writer who's able to see the complexities and make a character a human being in that way, and be able to pull at our humanness. And also make me want to throw the book across the room when she does the thing she does. So I hate to think of this ending, because this is really an insightful, brilliant conversation between the two of you. So thank you for that. Thank you for your honesty and your openness. Here at Tattered Cover, we love to end on this question here, because it sort of makes you think about the book in a different way, but it applies to both of you. What did this book teach you? For Forrest, for you as a reader, for Gil, for you as a writer, what did this book teach you? And Boris, I'd love to start you off and then end with our author of the hour.
Yeah, well, for me, because I'm mostly a poet, I've written a couple novels. I find novels really difficult to write. I'm working on my third one right now. So a lot of it was like, look how Gil gets the energy going and keeps, Miles Davis would say, keeps it up on the one all the way through. Just it was both like, it was like watching the dance, but also being conscious of, wow, that choreography is amazing.
I love the way you put that, because I think almost any writer would say that writers read books a little differently than just somebody who reads for pleasure, because the whole time we're looking at the choices that the writer made. We're looking at the choices that we would have made differently. We see the nuts and bolts. They'll make us cry too, and we'll throw the book across the room and all that stuff. But we are also at some level looking at it. Not mechanically, but we see what's happening in there. What did I learn from writing this book? Part of it was how important it is for me to put myself in the characters, and that it's easier for me to live with the characters if each one of them has a little bit of me in them, and find a way to create that kind of humanness in the character. And the other thing I learned was how to respect people who do research, and how hard it is for somebody who's not trained and who needs to know the information. I have enormous respect for people who write historical novels, and they do it really well. And there's a Canadian writer named Marina Endicott, and she has such a beautiful ability to take all this research, some of which she's physically done herself, traveling, and just blend it into the book in such a way that it just is so natural. So that was a learning experience for me, is learning how to handle research.
Well, I think we all felt a little bit of the humanness that you brought to the book, along with the in-depth research that you gave us to create this world and transport us into this time period. And I think that Forrest and I are not the only ones that are going to feel that in the book. So thank you so much for Ridgerunner and this amazing, just thank you. I want to give each of you a chance to remind people who you are, where they can find you online, and just to remind everybody that they can get their copies of Miss Adamson's new book at tatteredcover.com. So Forrest, if we'll start with you to close us out, and then we'll have Gil finish up and we'll be done, unfortunately.
Kaylee, was that tatteredcover.com?
Yes, it was tatteredcover.com.
All right.
we
Great.
were joking, to give some people some context. We were joking about that earlier, of making sure, oh yeah, we want people to know where they can get the book. So yes, tatteredcover.com, or at one of our locations in the Denver metro area.
Great.
Well, wonderful, and it's wonderful to be with Forrest and tatteredcover.com, allowing me as a Canadian to basically be there in some way with you guys, and go to the bookstore, find Forrest's books, and enjoy them. And thank you, Forrest, for really a wonderful interview and a great interchange over email. And I'm really very honored to meet you.
Really a pleasure, Gil. And I'm going to take away from this what you said in your last answer, that to humanize my characters, I need to put a little of Gil in each of them.
Yes, this is a rule.
Okay.
Don't forget it. That's right. A little bit of my own evil. There you go.
Yeah.
Kaylee, thank you so much for doing this. You are so kind, and you're such an organized and lovely presence. We feel very supported.
Thank you. That means a lot. And I want to also let our viewers know that you can also get Forrest's books and works of poetry at our store as well. We do have those on the shelves. So make sure you visit us in the Denver metro area or at tatteredcover.com. If both of you will stay on while I finish this out here, join us again for any of our upcoming events. We have 8 this week, so you'll be seeing a lot of me, but you guys can check out, we've got virtual story times, author events, some of them that I mentioned before, like with CJ Box. Check it out at tatteredcover.com/event. Thank you guys again for everything that you do for small businesses and keeping your money in local communities. We really appreciate it. Stay safe, everybody. Happy reading. Bye, all. And we're out.